Okay, so we're moving on, switching gears a little bit. We're going to be talking about training and coaching this time. So, for all of you guys who are managers or maybe sales professionals, SDRs, and salespeople that are looking to become managers, obviously, one of the key skills to have is to know how to coach and train your teams. So, to dissect this topic as much as we can, we're happy to introduce our following speakers. Bethany Steckenfeld, co-founder and CEO at SendSpark, Stuart Moss, director of sales development at Dealfront, and Jason Bay, founder and CEO at Outbound Squad. Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining.
Good to be here.
Thanks, George.
Okay, so let me quickly check the question. We've prepared quite a few questions, and as always, we're going to be taking questions from the audience as well. We're going to start with maybe the landscape, the current kind of state of things in your view, guys. So how has the sales coaching and training landscape changed over the past couple of years? And has it changed at all, in your opinion? Let's start with you, Stuart.
Yeah, sure. So yeah, I certainly think it's changed. I think the landscape will always keep changing and evolving. I think the difficulty is not every organization can easily keep up with that pace of change. I think that's always really difficult for organizations. But I think the change is often driven by the recipient of coaching and learning and their expectations of that material or learning that they're getting. It's good to be at sales development excellence because SDRs are actually a really easy group to demonstrate that point with, I think, because it's fair to say that a large percentage of SDRs are typically earlier in their career. They're typically, not always, but typically a younger audience. And how young people consume knowledge is vastly different to how I would have consumed knowledge at their age, because things change so quickly. I would have never had YouTube or TikTok or learning from Joe Rogan and his podcast, but now that's all I learn from, right? And my SDR team are exactly the same. So I think because of that, the landscape constantly shifts with it, and there's little value in trying to coach and train people in ways that just don't resonate with them anymore, because that's not the way the world is. So yeah, I think it shifts. I think it always is going to shift, and one of the challenges that we have as leaders is keeping up with that and making sure that what we do is valuable for our teams.
Absolutely. Bethany, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that's a great insight. And, I'd also add that just over the last few years, the world has changed a lot. Like it's hard to even remember, but, before 2020, most of us were working in an office. Now, a lot of teams are remote or hybrid. And so, just the way that people are learning is really different. And also the way that people need to sell is very different. So if we're talking about this specifically, on how are SDRs selling and connecting to people, there's been just dramatic shifts in the industry over the last few years. And even now, we've seen a greater drive to efficiency. So I think that, you always got to think about when you're training, how are people consuming information and what are they consuming? And the pace of change over the last few years has been just astronomical.
Jason, any thoughts here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the principles of how you train and teach and how people learn things, that hasn't really changed. The medium, to your Stuart and Bethany, your 2 points, has definitely changed. I think attention span is a really big thing to pay attention to.
Mm-hmm.
But the angle that I have a little bit of a different angle on this. The frontline leader is the one delivering most of the training and coaching, and enablement plays in that. I think that job has gotten much harder because of all of the distractions. So to give you an example, working in a virtual environment when you were used to being in the office, I literally work with teams and frontline leaders are getting bombarded on Slack by their leaders asking for updates every 20 to 30 minutes. And then they do that to their team. And it's really hard for them to set aside half hour here, an hour there to just coach, to do proactive coaching. The thing that every frontline leader should spend a third to a half of their job, like working with their reps. And I find that there's so much pressure, especially in software right now, where there's so much pressure to get outcomes. They're getting so much pressure from the top that they're not able to make that time to actually do the coaching. The only other thing that I would add too is that, social media, I think, plays a big part of it, but just like our phones here, like I think one of the hardest things that we do as leaders and reps, honestly, when I ask people is like, if you got a text right now, would your phone vibrate? And everyone says, yeah, it would. Well, why? Like, so if you got a text as a frontline leader, who would you be responding to a text from that's urgent enough that you need to respond to in the moment? There's so many distractions like that I think make it harder to do your job now, and protecting your attention is really the biggest challenge. That was a long-winded answer, but that's
No, but
that's my
yeah.
observation.
You know what? Probably as a follow up to that, and Stuart did touch on this briefly. I wanted to ask you guys on the technologies currently, maybe new technologies that you could that you're excited about, that you're using in the training and coaching. Stuart was talking about simple things like podcasts and YouTube videos, which is truly, like, I recently went to this event, this talk given by a very well-known business guy from Ukraine, where I'm from, and somebody asked him, "Hey, how do you consume? Like, how do you keep learning?" And he said the only thing he said, he never he didn't mention a number of channels. He said YouTube. The only thing I consume is YouTube. And this is probably one of the most the richest people from Ukraine, like business practitioners. I'm wondering, what role does technology play in SDR training and coaching in your companies? Are there specific tools, platforms besides, podcast platforms that you found improved your training processes and allow for more effective coaching? Sorry. Let's start with Jason. I keep forgetting to to do this.
I hate to be contrarian. I'm probably going to be pretty contrarian today. I think we could do with less technology, actually. When I work with reps and sales teams, when I see them share their screen, there's usually like 5 different tools right in their Chrome shortcuts bar. I'm like, they got to log in and out of all of these different tools. There's Rev Intelligence, Conversational Intelligence. There's their sales engagement platform, and we're starting to see some consolidation. But podcasts, YouTube, I mean, that's kind of old technology. It's been around for a long time. I think the stuff that's gotten pretty cool is the conversation intelligence, whether Gong or Chorus or whatever you might use, has gotten smarter to where you can put trackers and stuff so you can see, without having to listen to a call, is the rep using the new talk track that we talked about. And I'm pretty bullish on AI not really being that great for cold email right now either. I don't really see coaching from AI happening very well right now. I think it gets you like maybe 70-80% of the way there if you have a lot of the good inputs. But I would say from a technology standpoint, I think we could strip away some of the technology and just get really back to basics. Like, are you even listening to recordings of reps making calls? Are you using the conversational intelligence tool to look through transcriptions? Are you looking at the emails that they send? I'm just like really bullish on getting back to the basics, honestly, with this stuff, and stripping away some of the technology and making it easier to do the thing that you really need to spend your time doing.
Okay, thanks, Jason. I have a feeling Bethany has a slightly different take on technology and coaching, given that she's representing SensePark. But Bethany, do
yeah. Well, I mean, I like your point about like focusing on the basics and removing distractions. Like, I definitely agree. And like, I'm one of those people where my phone is on silent. Like, I check it enough that I don't need to be interrupted to check it. So I do agree with you, but I'm going to say, like, there's definitely some technology that I found is just a huge time saver, even if not necessarily for our team to use, but, for me to use on the analytics side of things. So like one thing it comes to mind immediately, we just got our company set up with June.so for like data analysis. And what's really cool about that is it lets us kind of tie in conversations or outreach strategies or different things we're doing top of funnel to see how that connects to revenue. That lets us like optimize campaigns. So, our team's not really looking at the data, but I am. And so that's helping me steer people in the right direction. And then when it comes to the conversational intelligence, I totally agree. We've been testing out a few different tools, and the two I like the most at the moment are Update AI and Fathom. With Fathom, it gives you like it'll alert you if you go on, I forget the term they use, but if you talk too much, it'll be like you're on a monologue, like stop and let the other person like talk. So I think things like that where it's helping people in real time, or at least afterwards you can go through the transcript, go through the data, kind of figure out some insights that lets people continue to improve. And then of course I'll do my own like shameless plug for SunSpark, just being able to like record videos and show people like, hey, this is how you update this specific thing in reply, or that, this is how you embed a video here. This is how you fix an account. And then having all that information tracked in a, in a reasonable way, you're able to watch the video. It saves me a ton of time. So I only have to say things once, and then other people can look it up in the shared video folder. So those are some of the tools I think have been absolute game changers, but, always love trying out new things.
Thanks, Bethany. Stuart, do you have any favorites in terms of tools or platforms for training and coaching?
Yeah, sure. And I think, Jason, you made an interesting point about AI and email writing. I think some of the challenges, people just lean into the tool doing the work for them rather than using it to assist. If we were talking about email specifically, I think tools like Lavender are pretty cool for actually helping coach you and understanding how you can improve along the way. And you get kind of those scores and grades so you can see yourself improving, and you almost end up competing with yourself. So I think it's how it's used alongside coaching and learning that can make the difference, rather than expecting the technology to do the job for you. At Dealfront, we are trying to make much more of a formalized learning for people. So part of what we're doing at the moment, for example, is building out an SDR university and an outbound academy in a tool called HighSpot. So we can kind of have, on day one, you learn this, on day two, you learn this. And within that, we're being considerate of everyone learns a bit differently, right? So Beth, cover your ears, but some of that is using Loom to record videos. Sorry, but we've got a bunch of videos in there. There's written content. Some of it is tasks and learning on the job, but it's trying to mix up different ways that you can learn and absorb, because everyone's different. And I think that's one thing a lot of companies miss, is they leverage technology as like a one size fits all. And they slap learning within it and say, wham, there you go, learn, and then wonder why people aren't as engaged with that learning along the way. So we're trying to leverage technology to best mix up our learning for our SDRs, so that there's something for everyone and it can be absorbed along the way, really.
Thanks, Stuart. I was going to move on to more kind of practical, maybe technical aspects of, I would say, techniques that you guys prefer in the learning process. So we've already talked about formal versus informal learning, learning on your own kind of mistakes and doing your going your own journey, or listening to intelligence tools such as Chorus or Gong, or our favorite that we're using here at Reply called Avoma. Shout out to Avoma. So what specific coaching techniques have proven successful specifically for you guys? Is there any approach that you could kind of separate and give an example of? Let's start with Bethany, you.
Yeah. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is like a philosophy that we have is just really learning by doing. Like, I feel like there's a ton that you could train someone and prepare them for, but like the best way you just learn is like being in the same situation again and again and again. And, ideally feeling confident that someone else is there to like back you up or help if needed and support you. But like, we just want people to like learn on the job and then get feedback immediately after and then try again. There's a, study I read like forever ago that stuck with me about, 2 art classes where people needed to build clay pots. And in one class, they were graded on the quality of the clay pots, and the other one, they were graded on the quantity. And, the ones who try so hard to make it perfect, their pots were way worse than the ones who just rapid fire were creating pot after pot after pot because you learned by experience. So that's, the environment that we try to set is like, it's okay to make mistakes, just keep trying and like be out there and get feedback and keep iterating and improving.
Jason?
Yeah, a couple things. So I think the frontline leader is the most neglected position. Typically in the sales org, they get the least amount of training. It's usually a top rep that worked up and they get zero training on how to actually teach stuff. So Rain Group has got an interesting stat. Reps forget 85 to 90% of the training that they get is no longer effective after a quarter. So the reinforcement of the stuff that you teach is the more important part of the equation. So I have a framework that I teach to frontline leaders called the reinforcement loop. It's very simple. It's teach, practice, observe, and coach. So teaching is different than telling. So I can't just say, hey, George, instead of sending this email, why don't you send this one? That's not really teaching. You're not giving someone the ability to fish. You're just telling them what to do. Practice is the most neglected piece. So a lot of times in sales, we practice on prospects. So we try something for the first time in a live high stakes situation. So that's everything from role plays, which can be done in team settings, one-on-ones, etc. The observe piece, so actually taking time to watch the rep in action, and then deliver coaching. And you got to do all of those things. The most neglected pieces that I see are the practice piece and then the coaching piece. What kind of feedback do we have? Scorecards that we use? Do we create an environment where a rep can self-diagnose their own problem and attempt to help themselves? That would be the framework that I would recommend, looking at those 4 pieces and kind of grading yourself in each of those areas.
I love it. Thanks, Jason. This really does resonate because nobody taught me how to lead a team when I started leading a team. So, yeah, that's true to all of those points. Stuart, any thoughts here?
Yeah. I think you asked specifically, is there anything that we've done or and found it successful? And I think one of the things that I've found works really well is so at Dealfront, when we email people, it's hyper personalized. That's just the model that works for us and gets us really good results. And so one thing we implemented, for example, during our onboarding process was part of that learning by doing, essentially, but in a non-pressurized environment. And so our new SDR hires will, part of their onboarding will task them to use the Dealfront platform to go and find 10 or 20 or 30 prospects in their region, in the right markets, the correct ICPs, and then use the model that they're taught to write outbound emails to those people. They then send those emails to the SDR leaders or team leaders who will, like they're the prospect, who will then provide feedback, critique them, and that throughout the onboarding process, the SDRs will iterate those emails and continue to kind of revise them until they're happy and comfortable with them. And at the end of the onboarding model, those are the emails that they send out, the first ones out into the field to their actual prospects. And so it's that learning by doing, but just, using that email part as an example and how we coach that, I absolutely stand behind that as well. I think that's the right way to do it.
All right. Thanks, Stuart. Next question. As always, I think we've been talking about balance in one way or another on all of these panels today. But how do you balance training and coaching versus actual work, actual daily responsibilities of SDRs, that ensuring that they have enough time to learn, but also to generate pipeline and everything that we hired them for. So how do you find that balance? Let's start with Jason.
Yeah, the general strategy that works pretty well here is less teaching, so fewer topics, going deeper, and then more time coaching and reinforcing those topics. So assuming that a rep is out of onboarding and they're ramped, it's instead of running 3 sessions this week where we talk about email and then subject lines and then we talk about objection handle, let's pick one thing to work with the entire team on. So where's the biggest bottleneck in my team? Is it email? Is it phone? Is it objections? Whatever it might be. In my one-on-ones, I'm going to pick the biggest bottleneck with that rep, and then I'm going to spend the majority of the time reinforcing what we just trained. So that's proactive reinforcement. That's literally outside of the meetings, listening to reps doing the calls, shadowing calls live, looking at the emails they're sending that proactive feedback, asking them to self-assess, etc., and bringing that feedback to them outside of those sessions as well. I would highly recommend not doing more than 2 or 3 like group style team meetings per week. Typically one of those would be spent, reviewing or breaking down a good example of this and providing some feedback on it so reps can see it. One of those meetings might be pure training and skill development. And then you might use another one of those just for, touching base and accountability type of thing. And just really keeping the internal meetings few as possible, and training should be very narrow in topic and very deep in focus.
Right, more doing, less teaching. I love that. Bethany, how about you? Sorry, Beth, you're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, I have a similar mindset there where it's really about the narrow focus, and what I try to keep in mind is how relevant is what people are learning to what they're actually doing. Because if you teach something and they're not actually doing it for 2 weeks, they're going to forget it by the time they actually do it. So it's really about just going in, doing that. Okay, maybe this week we're working on adding video to a sequence or something, and so it's just going all in and doing that really well before adding different things. But it's I don't like to pre-teach oh, here's a whole lesson, learn everything, learn all of our systems all at once. It's just try to do a very narrow scope, do it well, and then add more, learn it and add it well. And that way people feel confident the whole time and they, are able to practice right away.
Thanks, Bethany. Stuart?
Yeah, I think looking at this for a slightly different angle, I guess, I think it's up to the leader to intelligently balance people's calendars a little bit when it comes to training and coaching. Putting time in, putting a training at 10:30 a.m. every day, if that's when your SDRs typically smash the phones and statistically book the most meetings, it's a bad time to try and book training sessions. But I think SDRs are mostly taught, cold calling, emailing techniques, social selling, and stuff that revolves around that. And then their day-to-day responsibilities essentially revolve around speaking to prospects, right? And so there's the perfect time to try and apply and test those things out that you've been taught, hopefully at an intelligent time of the day to do it, because it's fundamentally your role. So it comes back to that learning by doing. I think that's the challenge, though. I think some SDRs struggle with that. I personally know SDRs or some SDRs that could beautifully articulate the best outbound model in the world, but rely solely on inbound and do very little outbound. And so it's that actually applying what you're learning and doing it. And whilst a leader can help coach you and push you, the greatest SDRs, I think, absorb knowledge and then just continually test it and augment that with stuff that we were almost saying earlier, YouTube, podcasts, books that they read, to then just outpace other people because they can apply that additional knowledge. So I think some of this lies on actually the SDR themselves being motivated to take that learning, test it, make it their own, and then deliver against it. But the leader absolutely has the onus of making sure they're balancing an SDR time and not being disruptive, and doing it at a good time that means the SDRs can take that, use it, and apply it to be successful.
All right. Thanks, Stuart. I think we're going to be closing off with one final question, and then depending on if we have a minute or two, look at the questions in the chats. How do you measure the ROI of coaching and training efforts? What are your recommendations? Do you only look at obvious things like meetings booked by those reps or revenue generated, or is there anything else? What are your best ways to measure whether the coaching efforts are efficient? Let's go in the opposite order. Let's start with Stuart.
Yeah, I think one thing I always do with my SDRs is get them to zoom out a little bit, and I always use the terrible analogy of if you're trading stocks, right? Unless you're a perfect day trader, which I certainly am not, if you're constantly looking at the chart, you will have a heart attack 15 times a day at the ups and downs, right? But actually, if you zoom out and you leave your investment there for a while, you can see actually where you started and where you got to. And usually that journey is quite inspiring, and you become proud of it. And I think SDR training and coaching is exactly the same. If you zoom out a little bit with SDRs and think about where were we, what did 3 months ago look like, how were we working then, and what does today look like in terms of the quality of your meeting, the velocity of those meetings going through pipe, the outcomes that we're getting, dispositions and sentiments of calling, the response rate you're getting to your emails and positive responses. Actually, I think taking a moment to step back and having a look at it can be, and really understanding where you were and you're from and you're to, essentially, it is one of the most sobering things. And SDRs are typically really, really proud of that journey that they've gone on in a really short amount of time as well. I think SDRs also forget how quickly that they learn stuff and deliver against it, and the value that they're delivering for an organization. So I think with SDRs, one thing I really like to do is just take a step back with them from time to time and assess those things with them.
Thanks, Stuart. I did not. Well, that warranted. Love the new Mac OS. Bethany, what are your favorite KPIs and metrics to measure success of your coaching efforts?
Yeah, I mean, of course, you're looking at like how well are they performing on the job. So like meetings booked, leads, things like that. But I would say like when I think of coaching, I'm really looking at how the employee should be progressing through the organization. And I'd say like, especially SunSpark, we're a startup, we're a small team, a lot of people have a lot of responsibilities. And there's a lot of different ways for upward mobility that depend on that specific person and what they want. Like, do they want to be a manager, or do they want to go to be like, and doing enterprise sales, or do they want to be doing like webinars and public appearances? It's like, what do you really want? And so before I hire people, like that's an important part of the interview process. I try to figure out, well, where are they going to be moving in the organization? If everything goes well, like what do they want for themselves? And so then when I'm like looking at, hey, how was the coaching, the onboarding, all this integration going? It's, well, are they on track to hit the goals that they want for themselves and that I envision them doing in the organization? So I'd say that's the secondary thing that's important for employee retention and satisfaction.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bethany. Jason?
I just dropped it into the chat, should pop up in a couple seconds. But so effort, effectiveness, or effort, efficiency, and effectiveness. So I think what's really important when you are training and coaching as an enablement team is just to think about what are the key behaviors that we are looking to drive. Like what would make our efforts a success? I know it sounds very simple, but a lot of times we just do training for the sake of training. So effort, the leading indicators, that's a great way to see if behavior change is happening, because behavior creates the outcomes, right? The efficiency is if we're getting reps to send more emails or make more calls, Are they getting through? Are people picking up? Are they getting replies? Are they getting opens? Then ultimately the effectiveness, what are the outcomes of that? You can apply that same framework across sales development or the work that you're doing with AEs as well. But yeah, I think the big thing is know what you're actually trying to make an impact on and what those key behaviors are that do drive the outcomes, and to focus on the behavior and measure it, which you can do with all the technology that we talked about today. You can measure that behavior.
Thank you, Jason. I think we're a little bit over time here, but that's the luxury of being the last panel for the day. I would like to thank you guys for joining and sharing your thoughts on the topic. Again, Stuart, Bethany, Jason, we appreciate you very much. We're going to be moving on to the closing statements, closing thoughts today. Thanks again, and have a great day.